John Rana was not a man people interrupted. In New York, his name didn't circulate, it settled. Conversations lowered when it entered a room. Decisions reversed themselves. Men with badges and men without them learned early that John Rana didn't need to raise his voice to end things. But the thing that haunted him most wasn't an enemy or an old debt. It was the child sitting beside him. Willie was 5 years old and had not spoken a word since the night her parents were murdered. Doctors had labels for it: selective mutism, trauma response, psychological shutdown, but none of them had answers that mattered. John heard silence where other people heard patience. He saw it every morning, every meal, every night she went to sleep without a sound. That silence followed him everywhere, including the restaurant. Before we dive into the story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story pulls you in, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, because I have another beautiful story coming tomorrow, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Now, let's get into the story. The place was called Waitress, the kind of dark, velvet-lined establishment where the lighting was intentional and the privacy was paid for. Deals didn't happen loudly here. They happened over wine that cost more than most people's rent, under the quiet understanding that some tables were not to be disturbed. John's was one of them. The wine had just been poured when it happened. The glass hovered halfway to his mouth as Willie's fingers loosened around her toy. It fell to the table with a soft clack that somehow cut through the room. John noticed before anyone else did. He always did. Willie stared past him. She lifted her arm and pointed. Her voice, unused, fragile, terrifying, broke the silence. Killer. The room didn't erupt. It froze. Chairs stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Somewhere, a glass shattered. John stood slowly, every instinct sharpened, every threat calculation running at once. The word wasn't fear in Willie's voice. It was recognition. Across the room, Lucy Schoonover felt it before she understood it. She had been working at Waitress for exactly 17 days. Long enough to know which guests wanted silence and which ones wanted obedience. Long enough to know that rent didn't care how bad your hands shook, only that you paid it on time. She adjusted the bottle in her grip backstage, breathing through the familiar calm that had nothing to do with the restaurant. Lucy, the floor manager, whispered sharply, grabbing her arm. That table is off limits. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't ask questions. Don't improvise. Lucy glanced toward the booth. The man, the child, the guards who didn't look like guards. Who is he? The manager swallowed. John Rana. The kitchen went still. Even the burners seemed quieter. Lucy didn't respond. She only nodded once and stepped onto the floor, moving toward the table where a silent child was watching her far too closely, as if she already knew her. The word that stopped the room, the soft clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation filled the air as Lucy stood at the bar, her fingers wrapped around a slender stem of crystal. The deep burgundy of the wine swirled within the glass, reflecting the warm, golden hues of the restaurant's ambient lighting. She poured carefully, her thoughts still lingering on the laughter of the past few moments, the sense of ease that had enveloped their table. But the moment was fleeting, and the undercurrent of tension she had felt all evening began to resurface. As she turned, her gaze met Willie's across the room. The little girl, perched on a high stool, was playing quietly with a small, colorful toy that sparkled in the light. There was something in her expression, a mixture of innocence and something deeper that tugged at Lucy's heart. Their eyes locked for a brief second, a connection that seemed fragile yet powerful. Lucy's breath caught in her throat, her heart racing as she felt a strange pull toward the child. Willie's small fingers slipped, and the toy tumbled from her grasp, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Time seemed to stretch in that instant as Willie stared, wide-eyed, at the toy. The world around them faded. The laughter, the clinking of glass, and the murmurs of conversation dulled into a distant hum. John, seated at the table, was the first to notice the shift. His gaze flickered from his drink to the little girl, an intensity sparking in his eyes. Something primal stirred in him, a reaction that rippled through the air like electricity. With a sudden, deliberate motion, Willie pointed directly at Lucy. The room held its breath, a collective pause enveloping them all. The unthinkable happened next. In a voice that pierced through the silence, clear and haunting, Willie spoke her first word in 2 years. Killer. The word hung in the air like a dark cloud, heavy and suffocating. The restaurant froze, the atmosphere shifting from festive to foreboding in an instant. A confused murmur broke out among the guests, whispers ricocheting off the polished walls, panic spreading like wildfire. Eyes darted around the room, searching for answers, for the reason behind the child's shocking declaration. Security personnel moved in instinctively, their presence a sudden, looming shadow that darkened the cheerful ambience. John rose from his seat, a figure of danger, controlled yet terrifying. His demeanor shifted, the easy laughter of moments before replaced by an unsettling energy that radiated from him. He glanced at Lucy, a silent communication passing between them, layered with unspoken fears. Lucy stood rooted in place, her heart pounding in her chest, the shock of Willie's word reverberating through her. She could feel the weight of every gaze upon her, the scrutiny of strangers who were now judging, questioning. Yet she did not run. Instead, she held her ground, an inexplicable determination coursing through her veins. The tension in the room thickened as John stepped forward, moving with a predatory grace, his eyes locked on Lucy. The world around them faded further, the noise becoming a distant echo as he approached, and the security team reached for her arm, their intent clear. Lucy. John's voice sliced through the stillness, a command laced with urgency and a hint of menace. She knew she had to respond, to make sense of the chaos unfolding around them. But as John's figure loomed closer, the panic in the room became palpable. Would they believe her? How could she explain the connection that had sparked between her and Willie, the inexplicable bond that had formed in that fleeting moment of eye contact? Suddenly, the air felt charged, thick with tension and unspoken words. The guests around them held their breath, eyes wide with fear and curiosity, unsure of what would happen next. Lucy's heart raced, a drumbeat of anxiety echoing in her chest as she felt the grip of security tightening around her arm, the world narrowing down to this singular moment. As John stepped closer, the crowd seemed to blur into a backdrop of muted colors, their whispers fading into silence. In that instant, she understood the weight of Willie's single word, the implications of a truth that had been buried deep within her past. She was about to confront everything she had tried to escape, and she knew there was no turning back. Time hung suspended, the tension in the air crackling like static, as the trajectory of their lives shifted in an unalterable way. Would she fight to reclaim her narrative, or would she allow the shadows of her past to claim her once more? The decision loomed before her, heavy and daunting, as John moved closer, intent and determined, while security hovered nearby, ready to act. The moment was upon her, and she had to choose. When fear chooses the wrong woman, the tension in the restaurant was palpable, a thick fog of uncertainty that hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Guests shifted uneasily in their seats, their eyes darting between Lucy and John, whispering among themselves in hushed tones. The murmurs grew into a collective assumption that Lucy was the source of the disturbance, the danger that had invaded their tranquil evening. As the manager approached, a man in a crisp white shirt and a tie that seemed a size too big. He wore an expression that blended concern with authority. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, his voice steady yet tinged with caution. "I think it would be best if you stepped outside to sort this out." But Lucy remained still, a calm center in the swirling chaos around her. Her eyes locked onto John, who was now visibly unnerved by her lack of reaction. He expected fear, a frantic response to the situation unfolding, but all he found was her unwavering gaze. It was as if time had paused just for her, the din of the restaurant fading into a distant echo. Inside, Lucy felt a strange sense of recognition wash over her, an awareness that this moment was a culmination of her past, a past that had tried to bury her under layers of fear and panic. But she was not afraid. Instead, she felt a clarity that pierced through the uncertainty. This was no longer about survival. It was about reclaiming her voice, her identity. "Willie, please," Lucy said softly, her heart aching at the sight of the little girl's wide eyes, filled with confusion. "You don't need to say that." But Willie's voice rang out again, the single word echoing through the tension-laden room: "Killer." The innocent repetition sent a shiver through the crowd, a ripple of fear that spread like wildfire. John, now visibly agitated, stepped forward, his voice rising above the murmur. "Everyone, back away," he ordered, his tone sharp and commanding. He looked ready to pounce, a predator cornering its prey. The guests scrambled back, instinctively creating space between Lucy and the onlookers, their fear of her boiling over into a palpable dread. Within moments, the sound of sirens pierced the air, a distant wail that grew louder as police were called to handle the disturbance. The atmosphere shifted again, the tension now mixed with the urgency of external authority. Lucy remained rooted in place, her heart steady, her breath even. She felt as if she were observing the chaos from a distance, a spectator in a tragic play where everyone else was caught in the throes of panic. As the officers arrived, uniforms crisp and badges glinting in the soft light, Lucy felt a swell of resolve. She had to maintain control, to assert her presence. "Please," she said, her voice steady as she addressed the officers. "Don't touch my bag." Her request was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried weight, yet the officers, focused on the unfolding situation, ignored her, their attention drawn to the disturbance that had erupted around her. They moved with purpose, assessing the crowd, and Lucy felt a creeping sense of urgency. They were about to invade her space, to rummage through her possessions without understanding the truth of the situation. "Ma'am, we need to see what's in the bag," one of the officers said brusquely, stepping closer. Lucy's pulse quickened, but her exterior remained calm, a mask of tranquility amidst the turmoil. She knew that what lay within her bag was not dangerous. It held remnants of her life, fragments of her identity that she was not ready to expose to the world. Time seemed to stretch, the moment suspended in a delicate balance. As the officer reached for her bag, Lucy's mind raced. She thought of the past, of the shadows that lingered, the accusations that haunted her. This was not just about her belongings, it was about her right to exist without fear, without judgment. And then, with a deliberate slowness, the officer unzipped her bag, the sound of the zipper slicing through the tension like a knife. Lucy held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest as the world around her faded into silence. What would they find? Would they uncover the pieces of her life that she had fought so hard to protect? She felt a swell of defiance rising within her, ready to confront whatever came next. The realization hit her like a wave. This was her moment to reclaim her narrative, to stand firm against the tide of fear that threatened to engulf her. As the officer pulled open the bag, the restaurant held its breath. And Lucy's world narrowed down to this singular point in time, teetering on the edge of revelation. What lay inside could either shatter her reality or fortify her resolve. The outcome was uncertain, but she was ready to face it. The search that shouldn't have happened. The atmosphere in the restaurant was electric, charged with tension as the officer continued to rummage through Lucy's bag, oblivious to the mounting unease radiating from the onlookers. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, a mix of curiosity and apprehension, their eyes darting between Lucy and the officers, caught in a spectacle they never anticipated. "What do you think you're doing?" Lucy's voice cut through the noise, calm yet firm. "This is an illegal search in public without probable cause. I demand to know your reasons." The officer paused, one eyebrow raised, a smirk creeping onto his lips. "Demand? You think you can demand anything here?" He leaned closer, his condescension evident. "You're in no position to make demands, sweetheart." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the mockery in the officer's tone stinging like a slap. Lucy felt their eyes on her, saw the conflicted expressions of those who had once considered her a threat. She maintained her composure, refusing to let his taunts provoke her. Instead, she stood tall, a pillar of strength amidst the chaos, determined to assert her rights. The officer's hands continued to sift through her belongings, pulling out items one by one, personal effects, a notebook filled with thoughts and sketches, and finally, a small leather wallet. The crowd watched in a hushed silence, each breath held in anticipation of what would come next. With a deliberate motion, Lucy reached into a hidden pocket of her bag and pulled out her ID. "You want to see my identification?" she asked, her tone steady, her grip firm. The weight of the moment hung in the air, the crowd leaning in as if they were witnessing a pivotal scene in a play. As the officer took the ID from her, his demeanor shifted instantly. The playful mockery faded, replaced by a look of surprise that crossed his features. He glanced down at the ID, his confidence faltering as he registered its significance. The second officer, standing nearby, leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the classification. "Is that level black?" he whispered, the words barely audible but laden with gravity. A silence fell over the restaurant, thick and oppressive. The first officer stiffened, his posture betraying a sudden unease as he absorbed the implications of what he held in his hands. The tension in the room shifted palpably, moving from a collective sense of fear directed at Lucy to something else entirely, fear of her. John, who had been observing the scene unfold, suddenly noticed the shift in the officer's demeanor. The arrogance that had once filled the air dissipated, replaced by an unspoken recognition of the power dynamics at play. He felt a chill run down his spine as he realized for the first time that Lucy was not just an ordinary woman in a fragile situation. She was someone with a history, a classification that commanded respect and fear. The crowd sensed the change, too, their whispers dying down to a murmur of confusion and intrigue. They had assumed Lucy was the danger, but now, as they watched the officers hesitate, the perception began to shift. The weight of her identity pressed down on the atmosphere, transforming the narrative from one of accusation to one of uncertainty about who was truly in control. "What's going on here?" John demanded, stepping forward, his authority pushing against the tide of tension in the room. "I want to see that ID myself." His voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. The officers exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. John's presence loomed large, a reminder that authority could shift in an instant. The air felt electric, charged with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation as the crowd held their collective breath, waiting for the next move. Lucy stood unwavering, her heart pounding, but her exterior calm. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, a mixture of fear and curiosity, but now there was also a hint of respect. They were beginning to understand that the narrative was more complex than they had initially thought. As John approached, the hum of the restaurant faded into the background, leaving only the sound of his footsteps and the rapid beating of her heart. The tension hung thick in the air, a precipice of confrontation that felt both inevitable and terrifying. She knew that this moment could redefine everything, not just for her, but for everyone in the room. The balance of power teetered dangerously, and as John demanded to see the ID himself, Lucy felt the weight of her past colliding with the present. The search that shouldn't have happened was unfolding before them, and the consequences were about to ripple through their lives in ways they could not yet comprehend. John Rana sat at the dimly lit table in the back corner of the restaurant, the murmur of conversations swirling around him like a distant storm. The clatter of dishes and the clinking of glasses faded into a background hum, his mind racing through a labyrinth of memories that had long been buried. As he stared at the menu, a name floated to the surface, unbidden yet undeniable: Lucy. The name struck him like a thunderclap, sending shockwaves through his already fragile composure. It was a name he recognized, one he had seen in the sealed files buried deep in the archives of the department. Those files had been tucked away, hidden from prying eyes, but John had spent countless nights poring over them, searching for answers that had always eluded him. Lucy was tied to a night he could never forget, a night that had carved deep scars into his soul and reshaped his understanding of loyalty and trust. Suddenly, his thoughts spiraled back to that fateful evening nearly a decade ago, a night shrouded in darkness and despair. He could still see the flickering shadows playing against the walls of their family home, the warm glow quickly extinguished by gunfire. The echoes of shots rang in his ears, punctuated by the haunting cries of a child, a sound that had haunted his dreams ever since. In his mind's eye, he saw a woman in the shadows, her silhouette stark against the backdrop of chaos. The chaos of gunshots, the piercing wails of his sister, and the suffocating grip of fear wrapped around him like a vice. He remembered the frantic moments that followed, the way Willie had clung to him, her small body trembling with terror. She was the only survivor of that night, the only one who had walked away from the brink of death. Willie, he whispered, the name slipping from his lips like a prayer. But it was Lucy's name that echoed louder in his mind, the connection between them growing clearer yet more tangled. As he sat there, the weight of realization settled heavily on his shoulders. John. The voice pulled him from his reverie, and he looked up to find Lucy standing before him, her presence both familiar and unsettling. She was older now, her features softened by time, but there was an unmistakable fire in her eyes that rekindled memories he had tried to forget. "I was there," she said, her voice steady, but beneath it lay a current of something deeper, something raw. The words struck him like a fist to the gut, forcing the breath from his lungs. The implications were staggering. You were there?" John stammered, the room closing in around him. The pieces of a puzzle he had never wanted to solve began to shift and slide, revealing a picture he feared to confront. "Yes," she confirmed, taking a seat across from him, her gaze unwavering. "I saw everything. I was just trying to protect you and Willie." Her words were a lifeline, but they felt more like shackles binding him to a past he had tried to escape. Willie, sitting quietly beside him, seemed to sense the tension in the air. She glanced between John and Lucy, her brow furrowed with confusion. John's heart ached for her innocence, for the way she had carried the burden of that night without ever fully understanding it. She wasn't accusing Lucy. She was remembering, a child piecing together shattered fragments of her past. Lucy continued, her voice a soothing balm against the storm raging within him. "I killed the intruders, John. I had to. They were going to hurt you both." Her confession hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. John's world tilted on its axis, the foundation of his beliefs fracturing beneath him. He had spent years searching for clarity, for a resolution to the chaos of that night, and now here was Lucy, offering him a truth that shattered everything he thought he knew. How could he reconcile this new reality with the narrative he had built in his mind? The silence stretched between them, a chasm filled with unspoken words. Willie reached out, her small hand resting on Lucy's arm, a gesture of trust that felt foreign yet beautiful. In that moment, John saw the connection between them, two survivors navigating the wreckage of their past, both burdened by memories they could not escape. Just as he began to process the weight of Lucy's revelation, the sound of sirens pierced through the restaurant, drawing everyone's attention. The commotion outside escalated, and John's heart sank. He knew that sound all too well. Internal affairs had arrived. "John," Willie whispered, her voice trembling. He looked at Lucy, and for the first time, he saw the same fear mirrored in her eyes. The fragile thread of understanding they had begun to weave was suddenly threatened by the encroaching shadows of authority. As the door swung open, and figures in dark suits stepped inside, John felt the walls of his world closing in once more, leaving him with more questions than answers. The past was crashing into the present, and he was caught in the eye of the storm. Stay close. He urged Willie, instinctively shielding her with his body as the confrontation loomed ahead. The restaurant was bustling with the usual late-night crowd, unaware that it had become the center of a brewing storm. The flickering neon lights cast eerie shadows across the faces of diners, while the smell of grilled meat mingled with the sharp scent of spilled whiskey. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension as internal affairs made their entrance, their presence transforming the intimate space into a scene fraught with impending confrontation. Lucy stood at the far end of the bar, her heart racing. She had worked hard to bury her past as an undercover agent, but nothing could prepare her for the moment when her life would collide with the very system she once served. As she watched the agents move through the crowd, she felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. The truth was a fragile thing, and the stakes were higher than ever. Her thoughts drifted back to the federal operation that had intersected with John and his enemies. Months of surveillance had led them to this point, where every connection could unravel a web of corruption that spanned far beyond the precinct. Lucy had seen it all: evidence of collusion involving politicians and high-ranking officials, the very people who were supposed to protect the city. They were the puppeteers, pulling strings while innocent lives hung in the balance. But as the operation unfolded, it became clear that the system was working against them. Internal affairs had been tipped off, their arrival at the restaurant a calculated move to silence any dissent. Lucy felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the implications of their presence. The operation was collapsing, and the truth was about to be buried deeper than it ever had been. In a moment of desperation, Lucy made a choice that would haunt her forever. She reached for her phone, dialing Willie's number, the one person she knew could help. Protocol be damned, the bond they shared was forged in fire, and she couldn't let him fall victim to the very forces she had once fought against. It was a decision that defied the rules, but in her heart, she believed it was the right one. As she spoke to Willie, the world around her blurred. Her voice trembled with urgency, but the message was clear: they were coming for him. In the back of her mind, she knew the risks. Choosing Willie over protocol meant stepping into a line of fire she might never escape. But the thought of losing him was unbearable. She had to protect him, even if it meant sacrificing her own safety. The moment the call ended, they struck. Internal affairs had been waiting for this slip, and they moved in with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Lucy was dragged away, her protests drowned out by the chaos that erupted. She was erased from the narrative, blamed for the operation's failure, and silenced by those who had once considered her a part of their team. The politicians, the very architects of the conspiracy, remained untouched, their power insulated by layers of deceit. As the dust settled, the officers involved began to realize the enormity of their misstep. They had overstepped their bounds, and the consequences were dire. The system they had trusted was rigged, a cruel joke played on those who believed in justice. The realization hit them like a ton of bricks. They were pawns in a game far more complex than they had ever anticipated. Meanwhile, John was making calls. As the web of betrayal unfolded, he found himself at the center of a power shift that threatened to change everything. He reached out to allies and enemies alike, navigating the treacherous waters of politics and crime with a deftness that surprised even him. The tables were turning, and the balance of power was shifting completely. With each conversation, John pieced together the fragments of a conspiracy that ran deeper than he had imagined. He could feel the walls closing in around him, but instead of succumbing to fear, he harnessed it. The truth was out there, buried beneath layers of lies, and he was determined to unearth it, to bring those responsible to justice. As the night wore on, Lucy's fate hung in the balance, a cruel reminder of how quickly loyalties could shift and how the truth could be manipulated. The restaurant, once a place of refuge, had become a battleground of ideals, a crucible in which the lives of the innocent were weighed against the ambitions of the powerful. The truth was buried, but not forgotten. In the shadows, whispers of dissent began to stir, and a new fight for justice was about to ignite. In this world of deception and betrayal, Lucy's choice would ripple through the lives of many, setting in motion a series of events that could not be undone. As the system clawed to protect itself, she remained a flicker of hope, a spark in the darkness that refused to be extinguished. The truth may be buried, but it had a way of clawing its way back to the surface, and when it did, the consequences would be explosive. The dim light of the safe house flickered as Lucy sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the rim of a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. The air was thick with tension, the kind that settled in your bones and refused to let go. She had been offered a way out, a new identity, protection, and the promise of silence. But none of it felt right. In a world built on deception, she craved the truth, even if it meant facing the shadows that loomed ahead. "All you have to do is say yes, Lucy," the agent insisted, leaning against the doorframe with a practiced ease. "You could disappear. Start fresh. No one would ever find you." The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility, but Lucy felt her resolve harden. "No lies, no shadows," she replied, her voice steady but laced with defiance. The idea of running away, of hiding from the very things that had shaped her life, filled her with a sense of dread. She had fought too hard to reclaim her story to let it slip through her fingers again. John stood off to the side, observing her strength with a mix of admiration and concern. He had seen Lucy at her most vulnerable, but this was a new side of her, a fierce determination that burned brightly, illuminating the darkness that threatened to consume them both. She was no longer just an undercover agent. She was a woman refusing to be defined by the circumstances that had sought to control her. "Willie spoke to me again," John said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost reverent. "He said you'd be safe." The weight of those words hung between them, a lifeline thrown in turbulent waters. Lucy's eyes met his, and for a moment, she felt the gravity of their shared history. Willie had always been the voice of reason, but this time, Lucy couldn't let his assurances dictate her choices. "Safe isn't enough, John. I don't want to be caged or hidden away like some secret. I want to fight back." Her heart raced as she spoke, each word igniting a fire within her. She was done being a pawn in someone else's game. She wanted her life back, unfiltered and unapologetic. John's expression shifted, and in that moment, she saw the gears turning in his mind. He moved closer, his presence a solid anchor amid the storm. "If you're not leaving alone, then I'll be with you. I can offer protection, not ownership. We can face this together." His sincerity resonated through her, a promise of partnership rather than possession. Lucy felt a flicker of hope. In a world where alliances were often forged in betrayal, his offer felt like an oasis in a desert of despair. But the reality of their situation loomed large. They were still under threat, and the shadows of John's enemies lurked just beyond the periphery of their lives, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Together," she echoed, allowing the word to settle between them. It was a risk, and she knew it, but it was one she was willing to take. The choice lay before her, stark and unyielding, to stand with John, to reclaim her narrative, or to retreat into the shadows of anonymity. But just as she began to envision a future built on strength and partnership, her phone buzzed on the table, cutting through the tension like a knife. The screen lit up with a message that sent chills racing down her spine. "They know you're back." Lucy's breath caught in her throat. The implication was clear. John's enemies had caught wind of her return, and they wouldn't take kindly to her defiance. The world they were navigating was fraught with danger, and the walls were closing in faster than she could have anticipated. "Who knows?" John's voice snapped her back to the present, urgency lacing his tone. She didn't need to answer. The fear in her eyes spoke volumes. They were being hunted, and time was running out. The fragile alliance they had forged was about to be tested in ways they had never imagined. "Lucy," he said, his voice steadying her racing heart, "we need a plan." She nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was the moment that defined her. No longer would she be a victim of circumstance. She would fight back, not just for herself, but for the people she cared about. As they began to strategize, Lucy felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they would confront the darkness that threatened to engulf them. But with the knowledge that danger was closing in, the stakes had never been higher. Their choices would shape not only their fates, but the lives of those around them, and as the shadows deepened, Lucy realized that the fight was just beginning. A city shifts when John Rana moves. The city had always thrummed with an undercurrent of tension, a potent mixture of ambition and desperation. But now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a blood-orange hue over the skyline, a palpable shift began to take hold. John Rana, the once unknown player in this dangerous game, was finally making his move. News broke early that morning. Several corrupt officers had been charged, their ties to the criminal underbelly of the city exposed in a series of explosive reports. The scandal sent shockwaves through the precincts, and for the first time in years, the air felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. John had been working behind the scenes, gathering evidence and orchestrating a plan that would dismantle the very foundations of his rival's power. As the day unfolded, whispers of an old case being reopened began to circulate. It was a case that had been buried beneath layers of corruption and fear, a case that could lead to the unraveling of the criminal networks John sought to dismantle. He had spent countless nights poring over files, piecing together a puzzle that others had long given up on. Now, with the right momentum building, he felt ready to strike. John gathered his tight-knit group in a dimly lit back room of a bar that had become their headquarters. Willie, once a reluctant participant, now emanated a quiet confidence that surprised even himself. He had begun to find his voice, his heart racing with the thrill of being part of something larger than himself. "We have the leverage we need," he said, his eyes alight with determination. "We can take them down." Lucy sat at the table, her demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Over the past few weeks, she had transformed from a waitress with dreams of escape into a protected asset in John's growing network. The shadows of her past no longer loomed so large. Instead, they had become a source of strength. John recognized her resilience and intelligence, and she had become much more than just a survivor. She was now part of his inner circle, not romantically, but maternally, a position that allowed her to nurture the others while also steering John's vision. "Every piece of information we gather can turn the tide," Lucy encouraged, her voice steady. "We can't let fear dictate our actions anymore. We have to fight back." Her words resonated with the group, igniting a fire within them. It was a new era dawning, and they were ready to embrace it. As the night deepened, John began executing his strategy. He carefully dismantled the rival network, leveraging the charges against the corrupt officers to push his agenda forward. With each step, he felt the city shift. The balance of power was tilting, and he was determined to see it through. The rival gang members, once untouchable, now found themselves on the defensive, scrambling to maintain their grip. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Lucy continued to thrive, her presence in the inner circle solidifying her role. She became a mentor to Willie, guiding him through the complexities of their new reality. Her maternal instincts kicked in, creating a safe haven for those around her. In turn, Willie began speaking more, his voice ringing with newfound authority. The once quiet boy now stood tall, advocating for their cause, his passion infectious, but with every victory came the weight of new threats. As John's influence grew, so did the danger. He could feel the looming presence of rival factions, their eyes trained on him, waiting for a misstep. It was a high-stakes game, and one wrong move could unravel everything. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting, John found himself alone with Lucy. They were both aware of the stakes, but also of the bond they had forged. "You're not just a part of this operation, Lucy," he said quietly. "You're essential. I need you to stay safe." He could see the determination in her eyes, a fierce resolve to fight for what was right, but as the days passed, John's intuition began to warn him of an impending storm. He couldn't shake the feeling that Lucy was not only a vital asset, but also the most dangerous target alive. Her strength and resilience made her a threat to those who thrived in darkness, and as he gazed at her, he felt a chill run down his spine. The city had shifted, and with it, the stakes had risen higher than ever. John knew that he had to protect Lucy, not just from the outside forces that sought to destroy them, but from the very nature of the game they were playing. The realization settled heavily on him. In the world of shadows and light, Lucy had become both a shield and a sword. As the night deepened, John resolved to guard her fiercely, understanding that the most dangerous game was just beginning. And they were all inextricably tied to its outcome. The woman whose survived months had slipped by since the tumultuous upheaval that had rocked the city, weaving through the fabric of its streets and alleyways. The once oppressive air had shifted, carrying with it a sense of cautious hope. For John, these months had been a time of reflection, a moment to weigh the balance between fear and control, and to understand the delicate dance that defined their lives. Lucy stood at the window of their shared headquarters, a place that had transformed from a mere shelter into a symbol of resilience. The apron that had once marked her as a waitress lay forgotten in a corner, a relic of her past life. No longer defined by the limitations of that role, she had embraced her new identity, one forged in the fires of survival. Her gaze swept over the city below, the skyline a mix of shadows and light, a testament to the battles fought and the victories won. Willie, too, had blossomed into his own. He no longer shied away from conversations, his voice now ringing clear and confident. The boy who had once been hesitant was now a young man who spoke freely, his words carrying weight and purpose. He had become an integral part of their operations, advocating for those who needed a voice and standing firm against the remnants of the rival gang. His growth was a reflection of the changes that had rippled through their lives, a reminder of the power that came from overcoming adversity. As John watched Lucy from across the room, he marveled at her transformation. There was a strength in her posture, a fierceness in her gaze that spoke of battles won not just against external foes, but against the fears that had once threatened to consume her. She had faced down the darkness and emerged not just unscathed, but emboldened. Lucy had become a beacon of hope for those mired in despair, a testament to the power of survival. Yet, amidst the triumph, John found himself wrestling with his own demons. He often reflected on the choices he had made, the thin line that separated fear from control. He had fought hard to dismantle the criminal network that had threatened to swallow them whole, but in doing so, he had also confronted his own vulnerabilities. Control had been his armor, a way to shield himself from the chaos that surrounded them. But he understood now that true strength lay not just in controlling the environment, but in embracing the unpredictable nature of life. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the city, John joined Lucy at the window. They stood side by side, the silence between them comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. "Look at it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's beautiful, isn't it? All the chaos, all the stories woven into one." John nodded, feeling a swell of pride. "It is. But it's also fragile. We've fought hard for this, Lucy. I just hope we can keep it." She turned to him, her eyes fierce and unwavering. "We will. Because we're stronger than we were before. We know what's at stake." There was a conviction in her words, a promise that they would protect what they had built, no matter the cost. As they stood there, John couldn't shake the feeling that Lucy had become something more than just a survivor. She had evolved into a force of nature, a woman who had faced her fears and emerged not just alive, but empowered. He realized then that the most dangerous woman was not the one who wielded power through fear, but the one who had already survived and came back standing tall. The city below pulsed with life. a vibrant tapestry woven from countless stories of struggle and resilience. Lucy had become part of that tapestry, a thread woven through the lives of those around her. She had not just survived, she had thrived. Do you ever think about what comes next? John asked, breaking the silence. Lucy smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. Every day. But for now, I think we keep moving forward. There's so much to explore, so much to fight for. John felt a surge of hope at her words. They had taken on the darkness and emerged into the light, their bond forged in the fires of adversity. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the last rays of sun slipped away, Lucy turned back to the city, her silhouette framed against the fading light. In that moment, John understood the depth of her strength. The woman who had once worn an apron had become a symbol of survival, not just for herself, but for all those fighting to reclaim their lives. And as he watched her, he knew that the most dangerous woman was the one who had already survived and came back standing. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story.